Um, so thank you all, and thank you, Brett, for the prayer. Um, could I have a reader just kind of refresh us on verses 12 through 18 of chapter 2, please? Adam, thank you.
So then, my dear friends, just as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now even more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is working in you, enabling you both to will and to act his good purpose. Do everything without grumbling and arguing, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God who are faultless in a crooked and perverted generation, among whom you shine like stars in the world. Hold firmly to the message of life. Then I can boast in the day of Christ that I didn't run in vain or labor for nothing. But even if I am poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with all of you. In the same way, you should also rejoice and share your joy with me.
Thank you. So Paul is laying out this work that he needs them to begin, as we've studied previously, calling for unity, calling for them to work together, to strive together against everything that's out there. And as Adam just read, Paul says that that they need to work out their own salvation with fear and trembling. So I want to ask everyone here, what are the resources that were available to them at this time as they work things out? What are they working from? Because the Bible hasn't been assembled yet, won't be for some time. But what do they have to refer to?
The Old Testament.
The Old Testament, good.
And then
yes.
There was prophets there as well.
Mm-hmm. The prophets, thank you. Adam.
The section he just got done talking about in Philippians 2 was Jesus' example.
Jesus' example, yes, sir, absolutely. Now, who were the carriers of Jesus' example? That these churches often were founded based, from, like, who are those messengers? Hint, hint. The apostles, yes. Now, which apostle stayed behind in Philippi in Acts? If you need to go check, go to Acts chapter 16. Actually, Acts chapter 16. Well, I say that. So Luke is the one who goes and stays with them. If you're reading, I won't go through the pronoun game on this, but Luke is the author, and in chapter 16, he refers to it as we went down, and we see we until the point when Silas and Paul are taken into captivity or into prison, in which case it becomes them and it no longer is the inclusive we. So we know that Luke stayed behind with the church, as well as one other person who's about to come up. So I'll play coy on that and leave that as it is. So the church at Philippi also had Luke there to help provide them with that information. No idea how long he stayed, but a good foundation came from having Luke there to help the church grow. So they have several resources, and they have this letter as well. So, and we'll find out who probably brought this letter just after we talk about the other one that I'm being coy about. So they have, it's not that they are without, it's not that they really have to stumble through finding how to be Christians. They have the Old Testament, they have prophets, they have the apostles, they've had that tutelage from Luke. And so they will be finding this out, or they're finding this out, and they have their resources to go to. And so they are told to not only learn and work out their salvation, but they're told to do it with fear and trembling, because the one that they are trying to serve, God, is so amazing that it should be treated with the proper reverence. It's not quaking with fear horror movie fear that we're talking about. It's a fear out of making sure that you're doing it the right way. It's a fear of caution. It's a fear of appreciation, as quizzical as that might sound. And in verse 15, we see that they're to do all things without grumbling or disputing. And we've talked about this in previous classes where it was to try to avoid disunity, to avoid division, factions. And it then says, we have, so that you may be blameless and innocent. Where else have we seen that word blameless in Philippians? You can give me a chapter if you don't feel like finding a verse. So we see it in chapter 1. I think it's even chapter 1 and verse 4, if I'm not mistaken. Nope, it's not that. Where is it?
Verse 10.
Thank you. So in verse 10, we see that they're to do it to avoid any offense, to be blameless in the sight of God. So if we see that repetition within so few verses, is this important to try to be blameless? So sorry. So this grumbling and disputing, is it only over big matters? Is it only over small matters? Does anyone want to make a case as to which? Or neither? All things. Thank you. So we should try to avoid grumbling and disputing in all things. Thank you for that, Lisa. So what are some strategies that maybe you have used that helped you get over a grumbling or a dispute? Like when you've caught yourself, what did you do to get past it? I'd love for any kind of example someone's willing to share.
I start putting yourself in emotions. And it helps you get past things that people say. We're all human and say things and do things we probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
And we're all human. We all have days in our roses, so to speak. So if we look at others and say, oh, well, they probably doesn't do anything. Always agree with the Bible.
Yeah, by taking the stance of the other person, it's easier to get that distance on it. And we stop looking so myopically on our own view of how it is that now we're forced to take empathy with the other person and say, maybe how are they seeing it? And that helps break us from that stance that we're at. And we're no longer, and because like you said, not everything is a bed of roses. So thank you. Yes, absolutely. Getting distance, empathizing with the other person. Yes, Haley. Mhm.
It tries to like
Yeah, writing it down. You then have to process the feeling that you have and turn it into a written word. And I've done that similarly sometimes. And what I'm always surprised by, and hopefully this isn't the same for you, but I'll look at my words and I'm like, boy, that was a loaded word, or like that was a loaded phrase. And I'm like, oh yeah, I really hadn't gotten the distance and the objectivity that I thought I had. Any other thoughts? Yes, David. Yeah. Oh yeah, the common denominator to this is time. Just not acting on it immediately. Not making decisions in the heat of the moment, but getting that time to allow you to really kind of digest. Yes, sir. Anyone else? Great. Yes, Mike.
So, I had once, but years ago, he kind of rankled me. I probably a two-way street. We kind of didn't see eye to eye on a lot of small doctrinal issues, and I think we just had different personalities. And I don't remember grumbling specifically, but I certainly thought grumbly things and probably said grumbly things. And then one time when I needed some help, he was there for me. And when someone is very kind to you and does you a good turn, it's very difficult. At least it should be very difficult, I think, to be upset with them. And that really changed our relationship completely. I can think of at least one other brother who I've had similar help and support from, and I know he's wrangled some other people over the years, but I can never really be upset with him because of that love that was shown to me in the past. So I think that helps. And it's also a way, I bring up a second example because it's also a way to be very proactive. If you're the kind of person who is always showing love to others, then you make it much easier for them, I think, not to grumble at your little foibles when they do come along.
Yes. Now, I want to point out to everyone, Mike started illustrating with what Lisa had just said of, making concessions. This person and I have had some issues, but, they're a genuinely good person, so Mike already embodying the very thing that we just talked about with getting the perspective of the other person before you've even really started to think about the schism that could have happened there. But to Mike's point, being a genuine good actor then helps pave the road for that understanding when those foibles do come up, when those things that would drive a wedge might otherwise come up. So being an authentically good person, trying to be genuine, so that way when these things do come up, you've kind of bought that good faith when it comes up. Is that a fair summary? Did I miss anything? Okay. Yeah, fantastic point. And I think that's even kind of echoed here, to be blameless and innocent so that you will shine as lights in the world. If you're being a genuinely good actor and you are known for your authenticity or for your, genuine good behavior, you are being that genuine light, and that helps distinguish you from others.
I can look at some person who always does great things, and I know they're a great Christian, but then they do something that bothers me, and I don't necessarily look at that. But if they've done something for my personal benefit, then it really hits home more than me just looking at all of them, just looking at, well, they go to church all the time, and they're always willing to chip in at church. That's great. But if they've done me personally a good service, if they've been there when I really needed something, then that's going to pave over. I think that potentially paves over a lot of problems when they do come up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's easy. I think that's a really good point to make out. And I think that was especially easy for the church because as we see, exemplified in Acts, especially as the church begins to form, they were heavily invested in each other. They were pooling together the possessions that no one had want. They were taking care of widows. They were genuinely invested in each other's lives. And so that they had kind of had that moment with each other. They had done things for one another so that there was that rapport with each other. So I'm not saying that that's happened specifically with anyone here in the Church of Philippi, but if assuming that Philippi is like other churches that we see modeled in Acts, that's probably a likely possibility.
I mean, I'm not talking about the good time doesn't have to be like going and bailing someone out when they're in financial distress or thinking some great thing. But I'm not going to really be mad at you because you got on a midnight to come and let me into the building. Where we lock the kids' medical supplies in here. So I mean, things like that. When someone does something like that for a brother, then it really goes a long way, I think, towards keeping the relationship good. Years down the road, even though it may not seem like an earth-shattering thing, it still creates a connection that will, I think, smooth over a lot of the
Oh, absolutely. I'll have to check with you later to see if we've had something and you're like, well, I'll let that go because he's done other things for me. Because now I'm worried. Um, oh, okay. You'll just send me a bill so that way I know that I've spent it up, if you would. Um, but the takeaway that I'd like to make sure that we capture from Mike's points about needing to have that good rapport with each other is that we have to invest in each person. We have to take that chance to say, I'm going to do something with so and so, or I'm going to reach out to them because I haven't talked to them in a while. By forging those relationships, we help build that unity, and we can only do that by trying to genuinely reach out to everyone in the church. I know when I first started coming to Fayette, I was working third shift, and I was working on the weekends because that allowed me to go to class, which was on first shift. So on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I was working 36 hours and then staying up late on Monday to get back on first shift to then go immediately die after class on Monday. So I was exhausted. And I was getting about 5 hours sleep before I came for church. Or I was getting no sleep and then getting 5 hours and then going back to work. Anyway, so I know for me, when I started coming to Fayette, there were several people who immediately were like, he leaves right after church, want to know what that's about. So they got to know me, but they also made sure that I was involved. They brought me into Bible classes. They made sure that I made connections to people that they knew. And so I immediately became part of the community. I got annexed by the church. And I think that's exactly who we're supposed to be as a congregation. So I appreciate that. And it takes the work of individuals, not just a couple of them, but the more the merrier, I'd like to say. Um, any other thoughts before we move on? Because it's been a great discussion. I don't want anyone to miss out. Adam.
I think just keeping things in perspective helps me to, does my grumbling or complaining, kind of to use the language that it's using here. First of all, the thing you just said in verse 13, it is God who works in you. Is my arguing or grumbling or disputing consistent with God working in me? And then he's going to talk about you shine as lights in the world. Well, you're supposed to shine because God is working in you. And so the grumbling and disputing, Jesus never grumbled or disputed when he went through what he went through, which Paul just got done addressing. And so if I pull back and put things into greater perspective of, am I helping or harming the cause, then it really kind of helps me to check myself sometimes.
Yeah, taking it to its logical conclusion. Like, is this worth it? If I take this as far as I want to take it right now, what's the likely effect, not just for me, but for the congregation? Because that perspective then really helps you say, is this worth it? It gives you the greater sum. And I'd like to co-opt that to say grumblings and disputings, especially in the church, can be particularly volatile because we're all operating from the same text usually. Sometimes someone brings something in, it's a lot easier to stamp that and be like, nope. But when we're all operating from the same text and we read it and we maybe read it a little differently, or we find the things to bootstrap our argument, it's a lot harder to say, no, you're wrong, or yes, they're right. And that the fact that we're all operating off of that same text makes it a lot easier for disputes and grumblings to really begin to affect the church. So by taking that chance to say, well, hold on, let's view this. What is this going to do? How is the other person coming across this? How have they been prior to this? All helps keep unity, not a false unity where we do it just because we need to get along, but a genuine one because we then say, is it worth it? So I'd like to assert, like, it can be very difficult because of that, but because of the things that we've just laid out, there's the ability to say, is this worth it? And can we deal with this dispute in a good way? So when we find these things, when we have these grumblings and disputes, what's the better alternative? When we find these things that are causing it, what's our best course of action? when we find ourselves in this, we really can't let go. What do we do? Say that we do have something that's proving difficult to let go, even after we've articulated. Pray, great. What else should we do? Talk to the person about it. Yes. I'd like to suggest too, with witnesses, so that way you have someone objective, not necessarily on either camp, but that can be a fair record keeper of how it went, and also can attest to how things go. Anyone else? If Dempsey were in the room, he'd be telling us we should go to the elders. I'd like to suggest when we have these things, before they begin to fester, before they rankle us, we should also make sure that after we've talked with them, we need to then try to go to the elders, to have that neutral party, to have someone who has the mindset of how do we go about this? Someone who has been appointed by the congregation as someone who can lead us well. Any other thoughts?
Letting things go, because sometimes I think we don't go to the other person because we feel it's not worth the trouble, and we definitely don't want to get the elders involved. But that's the moment you should stop and say, well, wait a minute. If this isn't worth talking to them about, and this isn't worth getting the elders involved, why am I going around grumbling to other people about it? It's obviously not a big deal. If it's a big deal, I'd be trying to get it fixed. And maybe that's when you got to do that sort of self-assessment and say, okay, I got two choices. I can just let this go, or I can go and talk to them.
Absolutely. Using all the tools that we just laid out to say, maybe this is something I just let go instead of continuing to let it fester. Yes, sir. All right. So we've talked about, what we can do to help avoid grumbling and disputing, and also what to do if we do find ourselves grumbling and disputing. So this grumbling tells us that, so he tells us to avoid it, to do things without, so that you may be blameless and innocent. So I want to suggest that we also need to think about grumbling and disputing as something that is shameful, something that we can be blamed for, something that is guilty, that we assume guilt by doing. And so we need to view this as something that sullies ourselves, that when we start grumbling on this, it is literally causing us harm, even if we may not see it at that moment, to say this is sullying ourselves, because we're supposed to do all things without grumbling and disputing. Because when we aren't, we are failing to be children of God without blemish. Again, that idea that we are sullying ourselves. A blemish, it's that bruise. It's something that is leaving a visible mark that others can see. In this case, it's a metaphorical one that's not visible, but we need to see it as we should try to view it as a blemish, something that people could see on our faces. So we're to do this so that we can shine as lights in the world of a crooked and twisted generation. And so I can't get over this metaphor of we're to shine as lights in a crooked and twisted generation. Now, is Paul only talking about the generation that's living at that moment? No. He's talking about the world, right? It's not so much this specific group of people, this age group. He's talking about the world is a crooked and twisted group, and we are to shine as lights. Why are we to shine, everyone? Think big picture. To let Jesus shine? I've heard somebody else over here. God's asked us to. Yeah, we're to let our light shine for Him. What better reason could you have than the one who we're trying to work out our salvation, or to work out our salvation with, has asked us to do it? Why would we not? If it's that simple, try to shine. Why wouldn't we do it? So we're to be lights in the world, holding fast in the world of life, so that in the day of Christ, I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. So it's not just, so I'd like to assert one thing that we need here is optimism. That if we're going to continue to shine, we have the light of God in us, and we need to be optimistic. We need to be united, and we need to have a positive outset that undergirds unity in the whole church. And there's a few different things that I think we can do to keep that optimism and to keep that unity. Things like building resilience, seeing disappointments, the grumblings, disputings, or any kind of a disappointment in the church as temporary, something that is not going to have whether it be for you or if the church has a setback, to view it as temporary, to try again rather than give up, to feel because you're willing to try again, this allows you to feel more in control, to have a good self-esteem. To go back to Teddy's point, I wish he was here today. Not letting our humility get to the point that we begin affecting our self-esteem. To drill down on this idea of the crooked and twisted generation, Paul similarly said something in chapter 1 and verse 27, which was, let your conversation be as it becometh the gospel of Christ, that whether I come and see you or else be absent, I may hear of your good affairs. Oh, sorry, starting in verse 27. May hear of your affairs, that ye stand in one spirit with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel, and in nothing terrified by your adversaries, which is to them as an evident token of perdition, but to you of salvation and that of God. So we see earlier in late in chapter 1 that Paul is saying you do have adversaries. There are those who seek to terrify you. So who are those? I mean, for Paul, we know his situation. He's alluding to the fact that he will either live or die by the Roman court system. Now, but Paul, prior to this, had already had a lot of persecution. As he was taken into custody, there was an assassination plot. The group who said, "Oh well, we will fast until he's where we will not eat or drink. We will not eat again until he's been killed." He definitely suffered a lot of persecution, and Rome's pagan beliefs could be turned against Christians at any moment. So, what were the enemies of the Christian church at this point, or in Philippi? Like if we're thinking about the twisted and crooked generation and the situation for the early church, who were their enemies? Who were the enemies of the church and its good work?
Oftentimes the Jews.
The Jews? Mm-hmm. Because they saw them as a schism. They saw them as an offshoot that had taken the word of someone that they didn't think was their actual savior. Yes, absolutely. Any other? Yes. Pagan idol worshippers in Philippi, because they were a miniature Rome, right? They had been settled by former soldiers who had tried to turn themselves into a little Rome. They had built themselves to continue to be more like Rome, even changing the structure of the city. They had Duumviri that were soldiers who knew the law that then went on to try to lead it in that aspect. So Rome itself has taken has become cloned here in Philippi. So a lot of the things that are happening in Rome could just as easily happen in Philippi. Thank you, Dan. Any other thoughts of who else needs to be viewed, or who else could be part of this twisted and crooked generation? Yes, sir.
Satan, of course. The scripture calls him the prince of this world.
Yeah, Satan, the one who's helping create the twisted and crooked generation. I almost said crooked and sorry, I almost said twisted and crooked. Yes, sir.
Wherever you have knowledge, you also have business. Perhaps. So, stopping that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. The businesses attached to idol worship, those silversmiths like we see in Acts, who were so angry because their bottom line was getting hurt, immediately whipped up the crowd against Paul and everyone to say, like, you know, they're damaging us. They're damaging the whole city. They didn't just take it as, well, us silversmiths are really hurting here. They were like, no, everyone's hurting as a result, because they saw it as part of their pride as a city. Yes, Eddie.
Matt, related to that is the actual story that we read about in Acts that occurred in Philippi, and that was just purely profit. And the reason why I think that's important for us is to recognize, you know, idolatry, at least in its classic sense, is not a great temptation or problem for us. To give her worship is not a problem for us. But just simply people becoming upset if you cut into their profit, that's appropriate for all times, for all places. The men that had that young girl that was, you know, prophesying because she had a demon. And when Paul had cast it out, that's what ended up getting him thrown into prison. And that's something that just as true today as any time.
Yeah, the love of money is the root of all evil. Yes, sir.
Never tried to build anything, and you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and you start, I need 6 people force. You go to that pile of people force, maybe it has 200 and 300 people force there in that bin. Well, you don't take the first 6 off the top because you can't ever tell which one of those is going to be twisted and warped.
Yeah.
You know, like crooked, because we're all susceptible to it if we're in the right situation at the right time. And Eddie's comment is true. We all have to be able to work for that. It's just because you belong to, you know, it's not just Pharisees that are the crooked and twisted generation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's systemic, and we never know who it's going to be at that point that really rallies against the church. Thank you for that. When you started with lumber, I was like, oh, Jansen, we got to get you a new job, buddy. But no, thank you for elaborating. I also worked at Home Depot, and I remember watching the men as we'd bring out new pallets and snip the wires, and you'd either see the lumber immediately twist upon no longer having its guard, or you'd see guys just like practically throwing them up in the air in order to like find the ones that they wanted. But that's a huge segue. I apologize for that. But just a real key memory once you mentioned it. So they could the generation around them posed all kinds of risks. From the Jews, you know, they were constantly using the Roman authorities to then say, you know, you should deal with them. You know, they were leveraging the biggest tool in their toolkit, the one that they saw as their enemy, but they really wanted to try to leverage them, and they did that through all kinds of slander and misrepresentation and all kinds of different things. They agreed to try to murder to murder Paul, and you know, it's not unreasonable that they could have tried it in other ways or with other people, just not recorded. But then, of course, as Nero really begins to whip up Rome into seeing them the church as the boogeyman, you know, they bred all kinds of dissent there. So telling them to be united so that they can't be scattered by the crooked and twist generation has a real value here. All right. Can I have someone read 19 through? Yes, sir.
One thing I want to point out, in verse 16, Paul does something he does a lot. He makes a word play, but he uses the phrase hold fast to the word of life. He's referencing back to what he said in verse 6, where Jesus did not regard the quality of God a thing to be grasped. Literally is something to be held fast to. And so he said Jesus did not hold fast to equality with God, but he emptied himself to become our Savior. But now he's saying you need to hold fast to the word of life so that you won't be affected by this crooked and twisted generation. So it's something Paul does a lot in his writings, using wordplays.
Yeah. Question for you with the wordplay. Do you think that like, was that more of the scholarly part of Paul, or was like, do you think that wordplay would have been evident for even a commonplace person who maybe wasn't literate at that point? Just curious.
I think, if I understand correctly, Greek words would make this very clear.
Oh, okay.
It's what we translate in English that we lose the clarity of that.
Oh, yeah, because then it has to get rendered in something. I could see, especially if it was like phonetically, like, oh, you could hear the rhyme, but that's not necessarily what's happened. But like, I was just curious if that was like, for those who are educated, it would have been like, I see what happened. Or if it was, or if you thought it would be evident enough for even the commonplace person.
I'll have to go back and check, but I think he actually does use the same word.
Okay.
It's just if we translate it into English, one in the positive, one in the negative, that we lose that consistency.
Well, thanks for drawing that out. I think it's always great to point out the beauty of the text, to say, like, it's not just enough that this is a wonderful message, but it was wonderfully put. Thank you, Eddie. So, yes, sir.
Verse 16, Paul, he tells them to hold fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud, and I did not run in vain or labor in vain. I know Jesus died for me. I know he paid the ultimate sacrifice. He gave his life for me, but I don't know Jesus. I didn't see that. And sometimes it's hard to really understand that he died for me, but when it comes to seeing my brethren, I can know this person put effort into my life. And Paul makes that argument there is don't let what I've done for you be in vain. And I think that's something we can see just by just one of our members of the church is to think about and realize what so-and-so has done for me. I can't allow that to be wasted.
Yeah, I love that, because it is harder to think, oh, Christ died for me 2,000 plus years ago, and there's a distance that comes from it, especially as we begin to learn more about the world as part of growing up in it, and as we go to school and all that, to then say, oh yes, I believe that Christ died for me, and that all this other stuff. But everyone here believes that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here per se. And one thing that's much more tangible, that's much more close, is having the people that around us that have helped shape us. Having that community helps keep us anchored to it, so that even if we're not totally believing it yet, say we haven't been baptized, the effect of the other people, the effect of the people that we're surrounding ourselves with, does bring us and keep us here, so that we can eventually get the whole word if we haven't yet. I love that. It underscores the effect of the whole group, the unity, and that it keeps us in with Christ. I love that. There was a study a while back that showed that you yourself will have the average income of the 5 closest people that you surround yourself with. And the thought is that because of who you surround yourself with, if you those people will be talking about the same things as you, making the same kind of decisions and buying decisions as you, and you end up being in that same group as them, even if you are higher or lower, because your friend group kind of helps shape who you are. They bring that they exert things on you in maybe less tangible ways. So So all that to say, we are affected by those around us. So having lights shining around us helps us shine. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that a lot. So yes, we are to hold fast. This is not something that is easily done. We do not we don't have to hold fast in quiet waters. We're to continue holding fast to the word of life, not to not to telling us where we are to constantly be holding on to, so that and at this point, Paul then says that I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. And Paul's love for the Philippians shows us how much he loved them. And I'm sure that there was a commensurate love of Paul. So for him to then say, please do all of this so that way my work for you hasn't been in vain, is just that added layer of like, I've done all of this for you. Please don't squander that. Please don't please don't make everything that we've done prior to this of no effect. And when someone is asking that of someone that you truly value, that request becomes its own reinforcement, to say, otherwise this might be of no effect. And so even if I'm poured out as a drink upon offering, sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. Again, echoing that give and take here, that reciprocal relationship of like, even if I am going to die for this, that it was worth it. And you all at the same time should be glad and rejoice because of all of this. Any thoughts before we move on to the next passage? I really appreciate everyone's involvement today. This has been amazing. Okay. Could I have someone read not just 19 through 24, but through 30, actually? Could I have someone read 19 through 30?
But I hope that the Lord Jesus send Timothy shortly, so that I also may be encouraged when I learn your condition. For I have no one else of kindred spirit who will genuinely be concerned for your welfare. For they all seek after their own interests, not those of Christ Jesus. But you know his proven worth, that he served with me in the furtherance of the gospel, like a child serving his father. Therefore, I hope to send him immediately, as soon as I see how things go with me. I trust in the Lord that I myself also will be coming shortly. But I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, fellow worker, fellow soldier, who was also your messenger and minister to my need. Because he was longing for you all and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick. For indeed he was sick to the point of death. But God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, so that I would not have sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore I have sent him all the more eagerly, so that when you see him again, you may rejoice, and I may be less concerned about you. Receive him then in the Lord with all joy, and hold men like him in high regard. Because he came close to death with the work of Christ, risking his life, completely what was deficient in your service to him.
Thank you. So the one I was being coy about earlier in today's class is Timothy. Timothy was also with them at the founding of the church in Acts chapter 16. And here we see that Timothy is about to be joining them. And Timothy will be coming to them. So this is a pillar of their church coming back. This is someone who has ministered to them and helped them grow. And now he's coming back, and so this is kind of like receiving an old friend, like Chris coming back to us. Every time he's back at the church, everyone's thrilled to have him here. This is someone that they know. This is a friend. This is a colleague. This is Timothy. So he's genuinely concerned for their welfare. But Paul's having him stay back. He's having him stay back until he has more of an idea of what's going to happen with him, wanting to see how this court case is about to shake out. I think there are a couple verses in the preceding chapters that kind of, or earlier in this and in chapter 1 that kind of say that Paul feels like a verdict is about to come, and so I don't know if this continues to uphold that, but in my reading of this, it kind of says that Paul does expect something's about to come, and so why would Paul want to keep Timothy around? Any thoughts? I'm not leading towards something, just genuinely, like, why do you think Paul would want Timothy around? Yes, hey. Comfort. Yeah, having a close friend there who can provide comfort, that you can speak shorthand with, that is someone that you trust and know, having them there for comfort. Absolutely. Any other? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for going back to the text. He's someone that is completely unlike anyone else for Paul. Yes, sir. I don't understand how Roman house arrest would have worked, but I would also think that Timothy could act more like Paul in that instance of going out and doing things, for bringing things back to him, taking messages out, being able to go and do things, unlike Paul under his house arrest. So he could kind of be Paul's arms and legs, or mouth in this case. He could be his actor, for different things. Any other thoughts? I don't want to perseverate too much on this because I don't know how much there is to really be gleaned, but I do want to elucidate why Paul would want him there, because I think it just develops that relationship and that there. Anyway. Okay. But Timothy's proven worth, how as a son with a father, he served with me. I hope to send him soon, but he is sending right now Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus, brother and fellow worker, fellow soldier, messenger and minister to my needs. So this is a man of many abilities who serves a lot of different facets for Paul. He's been longing to go to you. It's not just that he's sent and he's going to go do the work. He's been eager to get back he's been eager to go to Philippi. But he was sick nigh almost unto death at a certain point. And so, this is a man who, has had some kind of big illness, but he's come back from it. I really am amazed at medicine, because in the 1700s, even the average life expectancy was like 35. And, to think of how we've gone from 35 in the 1700s to 86, 85 now. I mean, there's scores of better treatment, but also just the type of care that you might get if you were sick, because they still believed in the four humors at this point, that you had an excess of blood, or you had an excess of bile, there were two biles. What was the fourth one? Yeah. Anyway, but they treated the treatments back then were far and away from what we do now. Anyway, so we'll pick back up on this, and we'll definitely get to chapter 3 next week. Thank you all for your kind attention, and I'll dismiss the class.